Tuesday, March 5th, the Florida Legislature will convene for the 2013 session. Tonight, we are live and interactive with members of the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation. Legislative Review 2013. Dialogue with the delegation is straight ahead.
This original WSRE presentation is made possible by viewers like you. Thank you.
And a very pleasant good evening, everyone. I'm Jeff Weeks. Thank you so very much for joining us on this Friday evening. For the first time in recent years, one could make an argument that the rays of Florida sunshine are once again shining on Tallahassee. Like much of the nation following the Great Recession of 2007, Florida faced some serious and uncomfortable economic challenges. While nowhere near pre-2007 levels, the Florida economy is improving, but at a measured pace. Tonight, we'll discuss the challenges as well as the opportunities facing the Sunshine State for 2013 and beyond. Your questions are welcome, either by phone or email. You can call in and ask your questions off the air at 850-484-1223 or toll free at 1-800-239-WSRE. Email questions to questions@wsre.org. We're joined this evening by members of the Northwest Florida Delegation. Let me begin by introducing Senator Greg Evers. Senator Evers represents District 2, which covers parts of Escambia, Santa Rosa, and Okaloosa counties. His Senate colleague and Senate President Don Gates could not join us this evening due to a scheduling conflict. From the Florida House of Representatives, Clay Ingram. Mr. Ingram represents District 1, which includes parts of Escambia County. Representative Clay Ford is the District 2 representative, which encompasses parts of both Escambia and Santa Rosa counties. Representative Ford had hoped to join us, but due to a scheduling conflict was unable to do so this evening. District 3's representative is Doug Broxson. District 3 covers parts of Okaloosa and Santa Rosa counties. And from District 4, Representative Matt Gates. Mr. Gates in District 4 covers part of Okaloosa County. Gentlemen, welcome, and thank you so very much for joining us this evening. I want to begin with a note of optimism. As I mentioned in the open, things are starting to improve, although somewhat measured. As you head into the 2013 session, and I'll begin with you, Senator Evers, what are you most optimistic about?
Well, first of all, Jeff, thank you and WSRE for having us on tonight.
My pleasure.
Where the viewers can, get an opinion and we can answer the questions, and plus we can get more feedback from our constituents as what they want us to do in Tallahassee. The thing that I'm most optimistic about during the upcoming session is the fact that we're not going to have to make the cuts that we have made in the past. So that's the biggest thing I think to be optimistic about, considering that the Constitution says that the only thing we must do is pass a balanced budget. And hopefully it'll be a lot simpler this year than it has in the past.
Representative Ingram, are you sensing more optimism in Tallahassee?
Absolutely. The three representatives here have not been in office since there was a positive budget picture. Senator Evers obviously has been around when there was actually a budget with when that was in the black and there was money to go around to fund the necessary things and some other projects as well. So for the first time, yes, since we've been here, there's no doubt that there's a feeling of optimism. And it goes back to some of the tough decisions that we made the last two sessions. Some of the cuts we made and the tough decisions we made with regard to the budget are starting to pay off. And so it's a good thing. And it's good to know that here in Florida, some of the physical discipline that we've had is starting to pay off.
And speaking of optimism, particularly for Northwest Florida, and I'll pose this question to you, Representative Broxson, but I know all of you must be extremely happy about this, and certainly Senate President Gates is certainly should be given an awful lot of credit for this. Nearly $1 billion will be coming towards Northwest Florida in the form of transportation and infrastructure improvements. Where did that money come from?
Well, I think it came from a very proactive Senate President who lives in the district and made a solid commitment that he was going to protect us during his 2 years. The biggest part of that is the Pensacola Bay Bridge. And we were looking at a potential $100 million shortfall. That was true up to 30 days ago, and Senator Gates was able to negotiate where there will not be a toll. We found the $100 million, and that will be great for Escambia and Santa Rosa because it would create enormous problems for Santa Rosa in particular because we did not have the mechanism to meet our share. And it is a great day. It is legendary that he did that for our two counties.
And it's money that's in the relatively near future is when you think about in terms of building such a major structure. Representative Gates, what do you think that sort of economic influx will do for Northwest Florida?
Well, it's going to continue what I'm most optimistic about in Florida, and that's private sector job growth. If you look at the state of Florida over the last couple of years, we've added over 200,000 jobs to the private sector economy. That places us second only to Texas and well positioned to be a place that is a magnet for innovators, job creators, people that want to start and grow businesses. And when that happens, it becomes the high water that raises all of the boats in the economy. Even if someone out there listening right now isn't someone that got one of those 200,000 jobs that exists now in the economy, when more people have jobs, the jobs that everyone has become more secure because there's more economic activity and vibrance. And to be able to bring nearly $1 billion to Northwest Florida, it's not only going to create jobs for folks in the contracting industry, but there's going to be all kinds of ancillary economic impact that will result in those projects. And to be able to connect our communities east and west with the Pensacola Bay Bridge and then north and south with all of the arteries that lead to I-10, it really, I think, paints the picture that Northwest Florida is bullish about the future and that we can be a place where the economy can continue to thrive.
If you guys would
Well,
like to.
along with that, Jeff, something that you got to consider is any time that you have an influx of almost $1 billion, that's 25,000 new jobs that will be created. So you're talking about west of Tallahassee, we're talking about employing additional 25,000 people.
Yeah, that's quite impressive. Laying the groundwork for businesses to come here. Something kind of interesting this week that I thought was certainly worth talking about. One of the New York papers, I believe the New York Post, ran an article that some hedge fund managers are exploring the idea of moving their headquarters to Florida, primarily Palm Beach area. Fox Business picked up on it, ran with the story, and today the governor actually put out a press release and a letter that he has written that he is forwarding on to these hedge fund managers. That's all fine and well for Miami-Dade, Palm Beach, Broward counties, et cetera. What can we do, though, in Northwest Florida to attract that kind of business?
You know, we've already, in previous sessions, we've taken actions. You know, we compete in the Panhandle. In South Florida, they compete with, it's counties that compete with one another. And here we have aggressive states like Alabama, Georgia, and Mississippi that we have to compete against. And so some of the incentive packages that we passed last session and the session before that have started to pay off. And I think we're a lot more competitive. That was the big push. That was what and is what Governor Scott has been focused on, is job creation and making the environment in Florida attractive for people to come and want to move their businesses here. And so because it's been our focus, I think it's starting to pay off. You see people from California, New York, like you mentioned, wanting to come to Florida. And I think it'll continue. And I think that jobs, I mean, it's almost uniquely what we're focused on because it affects everything else from healthcare to education. And so it's that focus that's starting to pay off now, and people are wanting to come here.
Do you think there's anything special that Northwest Florida can do to attract that?
Well, absolutely. We're going to attract a different sector of the economy than other areas of the state, and that's okay. Probably Miami will be more of a launching pad to Latin America than Northwest Florida will. Right. But let me tell you what we can leverage. We have land. We have available opportunities for light manufacturing, for aerospace development. Because we have Airbus going into Mobile, we are in the 150-mile corridor area to get a lot of work off the supply line for those businesses that would then be doing business with Airbus. And so what we need to do is to invest as much as we can of our time, effort, and energy in promoting the workforce that we have. We have all these folks that are skilled machinists and skilled in manufacturing as a result of their work on some of the greatest airplanes on the planet. Right. And when those folks retire, we want to make sure that they can get great jobs in the private sector and that can become really an economic hub, and we can create that economic ecosystem that will bring in those manufacturing jobs. We've seen some of that in Northwest Florida, but really we haven't even scratched the potential that we have that's unique to our area of the state.
And Jeff, if you don't mind me picking back.
Absolutely.
We passed a package last year that was aimed at keeping some of the military talent that is, transitioning out of the military. That bill passed. We were actually able to meet some of the first people that transitioned out of the military, and because we passed a package that allowed them to get a license for Florida, a professional business license in Florida for free, they stayed in Florida. Otherwise, they might have moved back to where they were from. And so it's little steps we've already taken, and we'll continue to build on that and keep the talent here.
And not only that, Jeff, the other thing that you have to consider is in the military appropriations last week, we passed a bill that would allow out-of-state folks that were retiring from military or veterans that would move to Florida. We would give them, because of the blue ribbon difference in pay for their college tuition, it would allow them to have in-state tuition in lieu of having to come out of their pocket to pay the difference from the in-state to the out-of-state. Not to mention the fact that, several years back around Whiting Field, we started protecting Whiting Field and looking at actually building an aviation park there, which now with Airbus going into Mobile, it's going to be a great fit, and also even here in Escambia County.
One of the things we have in our toolbox that we can't forget, and that's the restore money that's going to be coming down. We don't know exactly when it's going to hit, but we know it's going to be billions of dollars to the 8 impacted counties as a result of the BP oil spill. That coalition that was created, if we work together as a Panhandle, we can send a signal across Florida that we can do it right. We can take that money and leverage it and do more for our economy, not only this year and next year, but 20 years. And if we do that right, it is going to be a statement that we make to Tallahassee and to the rest of the state that we know how to take money that comes from outside of government and use it to help our people.
And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that BP money has to be used for more soft stuff like that. It can't be used for infrastructure and things of that nature. Is that correct?
I think the rulemaking process is still underway at the federal level, and I think we're starting to see that process become more liberalized. So there actually might be more opportunities to do some infrastructure projects. There'll be education requirements, environmental requirements, but our hope is that we can really build the foundation for even more economic development and economic activity.
Good. We do want to mention that tonight's broadcast is interactive, and we certainly want to hear from you, our viewers, and you can contact us or send in or ask a question a couple of different ways, either via the old-fashioned way, so to speak, on the telephone at 850-484-1223, or if you're outside the immediate dialing area at 1-800-239-WSRE, or if it's easier for you, feel free to email us a question. Just simply email questions@WSRE.org. Let me mention something that is being talked about across the nation right now, and I want to know how it will affect Northwest Florida, and for that matter, the entire state of Florida, in your judgment. And there's so much unknown about that, but that's sequestration. It'll be interesting to see what happens at the federal level. Probably an educated guess would say that it will come down to the very last minute, so it's very difficult to prepare for it. But your thoughts on it, and I'll begin with you, Senator Evers.
Well, I think one of the things that our constituents and the folks in the state of Florida that's very concerned about is our Second Amendment rights. And one of the things that has seemed to build at the federal level is, the limiting certain weapons, certain magazines, this kind of thing. But here in Florida, and there has been quite a few bills that has been filed to do or to water down Stand Your Ground or the Castle Doctrine, the bills that we have fought very hard for. And Representative Gates and myself, which both sat on criminal justice, those bills happen to originate and will start in those particular committees. And as far as my committee and the thing that I'm concerned with, I don't think we have a problem with it, and I think Representative Gates feels the same way. And we don't feel like Stand Your Ground. We don't feel like Castle Doctrine's broke. We feel like there's a court case going on, and it needs to go through the process, and cooler heads will prevail.
Would any of you see a situation talking about the issues going on with the Second Amendment, and certainly, obviously the president is pushing for stricter gun laws. Regardless of what happens on the federal level, would any of you at any point in time see a need to make Florida's laws stricter or make any changes in the law at this stage in the game?
Well, I agree with everything Senator Evers said. He and I have the opportunity to chair the committees that have jurisdiction over gun laws in our state, and we tend to think that too many restrictive gun laws only restrict the rights of law-abiding citizens. Senator Evers and I want law-abiding citizens not only to be able to bear arms, as the Constitution requires, but also to be able to use them in an instance where that may be necessary. The right to bear arms is somewhat abridged if someone brings violence to you and you have a legal obligation to retreat. And that used to be the case in Florida. I don't think anybody who's attacked ought to have a legal obligation to retreat. And so that's why I'm glad Senator Evers and I will likely be the people standing in the breach to stop an erosion of those rights. But you asked a great question, Jeff, about sequestration. And I want to make sure to answer that as well. When the Pentagon gets a cold, we get pneumonia in Northwest Florida because all of the anxiety that has surrounded a choke on federal dollars for defense contracting means that businesses in our community don't have the ability to then hire more people and grow and expect more contracts because they're so concerned about what the future may hold. This is a classic case of Washington just getting it wrong and being unable to get together and work things out. I mean, we would never have an environment like that in the legislature. I don't think our constituents in the state of Florida would tolerate it. And so when there's all this bickering and all this partisanship, sometimes for the sake of partisanship, over the state of our military, I mean, we are literally playing politics with our ability to defend the country. And that's deeply troubling. I think that it does no service to our, the generation of our grandparents who went and fought to build the greatest military on the planet to see this happening. And so the state of Florida is making a serious and significant investment in protecting those defense contractors that are within our state. We're trying to ensure that if they choose to diversify in other fields like healthcare, technology, innovation, aerospace, that they don't go to other states as they're building their ancillary books of business. We want to keep them here in Florida because the defense economy is a big deal in the Panhandle. It's a big deal in the state, and let's just hope Washington gets it right.
Yeah. It's a major part of our economy, and we have done, as Senator Evers mentioned, Whitingfield is a great example. We knew they were on the chopping block 10 years ago. They're not now because we buffered them to make sure that they maintain a viable mission here in the area. We are all meeting with the different bases to make sure that they're comfortable with what we're doing in Tallahassee. And the governor's made a commitment to meet quarterly with every base in Florida. So we're sending a message to Washington that we're proud of our bases. We're going to give back to them. They not only give to us, but we're going to give to them to make sure that they stay in Florida and a vital part of our national defense.
Representative Ingram?
Yeah, and this piggybacks on what's already been said, but I mean, we are always concerned about the base realignment and closure process, and if sequestration happens the way it potentially could, there's no doubt that all of our bases are in danger, and so we want to make sure we do everything as we can as a state, whether it's infrastructure improvements that the bases ask for, the environmental buffers that have largely been done here, Whiting and others are done, and I think that there's some tangible things we can do to make sure that if sequestration hits like we know it possibly could, that we've done everything we can to prevent closures here in Northwest Florida.
Certainly, we agree.
The other thing is, Jeff, is right now. We know that there is possibly, or there is definitely, another round of BRAC coming. And we're making preparations in the Military and Veteran Affairs Committee to show just how important the military is to us. We did that in 2003 and 4, which granted us, with no base closures, around 5 and 6. And so here again, we're preparing for that same round to go through again. And with the additional monies that we have had this year, that we're actually forming up and we're actually protecting our military bases, not only from the encroachment, but even our National Guard, we're actually ramping up the National Guard armories, and bringing the standard in those up higher, which sends a big message to Washington that, you know, we're proud of our military and we'll protect them. Not only that, we're also there's some bills out there that will add incentives for military contractors that doing research, doing development, and for their employees that will actually improve their situation as far as, and it's not, when we say, when we're talking about giving an incentive, what this would be a tax abatement. In other words, when they pay the money in that they would normally pay on certain taxes, they would receive that money back to help their business, help it grow, and that would be lined out prior to ever signing the paperwork on it.
As much as we love and appreciate our military in Northwest Florida, from Pensacola on over across Eglin and even down into Bay County, should we make a concentrated effort to diversify our economy above and beyond military and tourism?
Absolutely, and you know, one of the other industries that people travel from all over to use here is healthcare. We have three world-class hospitals, and that's one way that we've diversified our economy here are the three hospitals that we have here. And so, again, you know, there are things we can do to make it a friendly environment for healthcare, and I think we'll focus on that. And that's just one. There are others, but you're absolutely right. We have to make sure, you know, that tourism and defense are not the only thing that we're focused on.
And what's happening in Mobile is an example of what we can do to join with our neighbors. They have a band around Mobile where they're going to need the industries in the Panhandle to come forward and to provide qualified people. And the military provides many of those people. So we have a great chance to team up with them. They've spent an enormous amount of state money to attract these businesses. Now we have a chance to join with them and show them that we can help partner with them and give them quality workmen and women.
You mentioned healthcare. We can't get away from this one. So here we go. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare. How will that affect the state of Florida, particularly when it comes to the Medicaid issue?
Well, it's the risk of a generation, Jeff. And if Florida gets it wrong, then legislatures 5 and 10 years from now will be raising taxes. That is simply the bottom line. And I think it would be a terrible mistake for Florida to lead with our chin and be one of the first states to go implement this bizarre system. I mean, here are the options for Floridians. We can create a state exchange, which essentially is a surrender of our sovereignty, and then we get hooked into all the federal strings that are attached to the dollars associated with the state exchange. Things that many of us would find deeply troubling. The requirement to pay for elective abortions, the requirement to pay for services that the state has determined not to pay for so that we can prioritize our own needs. All kinds of those risks. The other option is to just expand Medicaid. Now, I don't know too many folks out there that think that Medicaid is the ideal health insurer to have. I mean, we want people to actually get off of Medicaid and to have control over their own insurance and not have the government telling them what doctor they have to go see. Most physicians that take Medicaid do it more for charity than they do as a profit center because it's such a pain to deal with Medicaid. So when we have a system that is so deeply flawed, the last thing we should do is to take 1.5 million more Floridians and dump them into that flawed system. So the final option for us is really to show some humility regarding our own jurisdiction, show some restraint, and to not enter into this fray with the federal government. That's what I believe. Now, what that means is that our businesses, our job creators and employers in Florida will have to participate in a federal exchange if a federal exchange is set up. My hope is that the Republicans in Congress will step forward and not fund a federal exchange. And if that were to occur, then our businesses, our job creators, wouldn't have any penalty for not participating in something that doesn't exist. So there are plenty of other states that are taking action to move forward. I think we should be a few steps behind them.
That was well said. There are a couple of other parts to it I thought about. The expansion of Medicaid, there are a couple of different parts to that. There is a way that could be gone about where we would add, a million plus people that are not currently eligible and add them onto the rolls. You can imagine that would, let me take a step back. There are two parts. There's the part of adding people that are not currently eligible, or including people that are eligible now but are not enrolled. The people that are not enrolled, if of course they could go on the books now, but that would be of enormous cost to the state. Medicaid's about a third of our budget currently, and it's going to continue to grow if we go down that path. That other approximately 1 million people that are not eligible now that could become eligible, that's where we get in that old back and forth with the federal government, where they would pay for it at 100% for those people that are that would come onto the rolls for about 2 years. It drops to 90% and then 80%, and then eventually who knows. And so there we are again, where if you take that federal money or adopt that federal program, it creates an enormous, probably unthinkable budget problem down the road. And I don't know if that's ethically right to do to the folks that have to make the decisions down the road after we're gone.
The feds are begging Florida to step up and to be one of the first states, because they're in such a state of confusion. Mm-hmm. They really do not know what they've created, and they're looking for help from the state, particularly Florida. We're such a big player nationally, and I don't believe this legislature is going to help them figure out a problem they've created. And I know a lot of this has to do with politics, and we would not be having this conversation if the election would have gone the other way, but we're going to have to deal with it. Florida will deal with it, but we're not going to be the first state that does that, because there's really no incentive for us to step forward at this time.
Think about it this way, Jeff. Today, right now, 1 in every 5 Floridians is on Medicaid. If we expand Medicaid to another 1.6, 1.5 million more Floridians, 1 in every 4 Floridians will be on Medicaid, which means that 3 of us will have to pay for the cost of our own health care and 1/3 of the cost of somebody else's. It's a completely unsustainable model. I mean, it's not something that will work for the long term, and I would rather confront that reality today than to shirk the responsibility and have future legislatures have to deal with it. And this whole notion that the federal government dangles out about, well, it'll be our money, the federal government's money, not state money. And we have colleagues in the legislature who say, look, take federal money. It's not state money. But the people watching at home right now, it's all their money. And right now, when we take federal money, that's money that's being borrowed from China, borrowed against future generations, and it's irresponsible.
Anyone else want to add to that, or do we feel like we're pretty well?
In the big thing about it, and I guess the simplest way to look at it, is how can you play a ball game if you don't know what the rules are? And the federal government hadn't told us what the rules are, and then they expect us to do an implementation and us create our own thing. And so I say that, let them do their thing. Let's see where they have the short flaws, and then we'll pick it up and we'll make it right.
It will be interesting, there's no question about that. We certainly want to hear from you, our viewers. You can call us at 850-484-1223 with a question, or 1-800-239-WSRE, or email a question to questions@wsre.org. Speaking a little bit on the national level still, but certainly it affects Florida, a question from a viewer. Patricia in Pensacola wants to know, what are your thoughts on President Obama's proposed minimum wage of raising it to $9? Now, as I understand it right now, Florida actually has one of the higher minimum wages in the state, or excuse me, in the nation. But the idea of the federal government mandating to $9 an hour, your thoughts?
We have a required minimum wage now in Florida, but frankly, when you have mandatory minimum wages, it is a way to think about the economy that is so antiquated. I mean, back in the world where you only recruited workers from a geographic nexus, then minimum wages, I guess, made sense because you ensured you protected the people that lived within that area. But now the world is smaller. The workforce is global. And it seems like the president keeps marching us down this path that becomes increasingly less economically competitive. Increasing minimum wages and then pairing that with the highest corporate tax rate in the world leads to more capital leaving this country, more jobs leaving this country. We want to repatriate that capital, bring people back here, not because we have more mandates from government, but because we have more innovators, because we have more Facebooks, we have more Apples, we have more Microsofts. And so we don't need the government to lead that initiative. We need to unlock the potential of the entrepreneurs in our country.
Anyone want to add to that?
With unemployment as high as it is, to continually put mandates and the unknown about national health care is going to create an atmosphere where employers will not want to expand. Why would we do that in such an economy where many questions are to be answered?
I'm kind of curious your thoughts on this, and I've asked this question of many business leaders. Just kind of get your thoughts when it comes to unemployment. Obviously, it's a lot higher than any of us are comfortable with, not only in the state of Florida, but across the nation. Do you think, though, some of our unemployment issues are structural versus economics? And what I simply mean by that is there are jobs that are available out there. We just don't have enough qualified people to fill those jobs.
Right. I know Representative Gates will jump on this, and rightly so, because he leads the effort a lot of times. But there's a lot to that. We've sort of tried to take the educational system that we have, where people major in sociology. I majored in communications. But you get out of school and there's not a lot of jobs in those fields. It's hard to go open up a philosophy shop.
Right.
But if we take our educational system and tailor it toward the jobs that are needed, there's a story. I don't want to step on Matt Gates because he tells the story better than I do. But the Dow Chemical Corporation, wanted to go out and they needed to hire engineers, and they couldn't find enough qualified engineers there, so they decided they would build a university to crank out those engineers, and couldn't do it here, and had to go and build it in India, if that's correct. So we've got to take the science, technology, engineering, math disciplines, and we've got to put focus there, because that's where the jobs are, that's where the money is, that's where the information intelligence field of the future. That's where the jobs are, not as much in the traditional model that we have. And so, if we create an educational system that cranks out the type of degrees that we need or vocations that we need, people will be able to get more jobs, no doubt about it.
You want to add
Yeah,
something?
I completely agree with Representative Ingram's retelling of my story. The truth is, Jeff, there are 1 million jobs in America today that are unfilled because there are not qualified applicants to fill them. And as Representative Ingram said, they are in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So the people that are really going to be able to build this economy for the future are the ones looking through the windshield, not the folks that are looking in the rear view, in the jobs of the past and the economies of the past. Health technology is going to be a major growth sector. In Northwest Florida, with our health institutions and with the great higher education institutions we have, we could create that cluster here. The problem, as Representative Ingram pointed out, is that we got too many people that enroll in college and think like I did when I was there, which was, hey, what's going to be, what am I interested in?
Right.
What are fun classes for me to take? I got a degree in political science. I would have done better to get a degree in volleyball. At least then I would have graduated with some sort of a skill. But the way to do that then, the way to reverse engineer churning out those people and creating those clusters in Florida is, I think, radical higher education reform that we will see in the legislature this session. The cost of a biochemical engineering degree should not be the same as the cost of a sociology degree. Taxpayers should only be incentivizing and subsidizing degrees that will actually attract resources and capital to the state of Florida. So if that may not be good news if you're a Slavic languages professor, but if you're someone that is a young 8th grade math student or a science student that's really sharp in the 10th grade, I want to make it easier for those students to stay in Florida and to pursue the degrees that lead to the economy and the jobs of tomorrow.
I think one of the things Governor Scott has said, that he wants to keep level the tuition over your 4-year period. I think that's something that he's talked about. But let's address, before we talk about higher education, though, something on the technical side of things. How do we do a better job of preparing? Because not everybody's college material. Not everybody is geared towards going to college. So how do we do a better job of preparing our students in high school to have some of those technical skills where they get out of high school and immediately go into a job situation or something along
Jeff,
those?
a lot of it is there's a stigma to not taking the college route when you're in high school. Right. And a kid that goes and goes to a technical school, a Georgetown here or West Florida Tech, and learns how to weld or how to be a plumber. A lot of the plumbers I know make $100,000 a year or more and have tremendous businesses and hire people and contribute to the economy. And so absolutely, first, take away that stigma of not going to college makes you not as good as someone who goes to college. Provide those opportunities for vocational education. Expand the schools like Georgetown, like West Florida Tech here. They're great models, but I think that the groundwork's there. We've just got to expand it and encourage kids to do it and let them know that it's okay to do that.
And the odd thing is, from the anecdotal evidence that I get from people, is so much of those technical jobs are less turning wrenches, so to speak, and more plugging in computers and things of that nature. And you can
it's still working with your hands.
Absolutely.
It's still technical. It's not educational as far as college or upper
your
college
traditional
level.
educational
Your traditional,
route.
right. I mean, that's the thing, because reminds me of a joke. When you talk about the plumber, it was the plumber's toilet tore up. His wife got on him. He calls the plumber comes. The guy's a doctor. The plumber hands the doctor a bill, and he said, it was $1,500, and the guy had been there for 5 minutes. And the guy says, $1,500, I don't make this in 5 minutes as a doctor. And the plumber looked at him and said, when I was a doctor, I didn't make that either. So, the reality of it is, and so many people, and I use the slang term educated beyond their intelligence, when they're very educated when it comes to using computers and this kind of stuff, but yet they can't put a fuse into the fuse box in their car, so when they plug their laptop up, it'll work.
Yeah.
Because it blowed a fuse.
One of the challenges we're having is really defining what is a diploma. Is a diploma something that prepares you for college or prepares you for life? If we're telling our kids that a diploma is going to get them into a college and they're going to do well as a freshman, we're really not telling them the truth, because many of our students, the first thing they do to be prepared for classes is have remedial courses. Is that a true reflection of what a diploma should be? So we're having a lot of debate in Tallahassee about the message we want to send our 67 counties on the quality of education that needs to be statewide. And it's a very challenging question, because Key West and Pensacola, Jacksonville, and Tampa are different places to educate folks.
Speaking of education, in order to have have students with solid educations, you have to have good teachers. No question about that. One of the things that Governor Scott wants to do is pretty much an across-the-board $2,500 raise for full-time teachers. Your thoughts?
Well, with all respect to the governor, I think that would be a step backward, and here's why. We've made a tremendous investment in the state of Florida in determining who some of the great, bright teachers are that ought to be rewarded above and beyond, because they work above and beyond. And frankly, I don't think that it's consistent with our principles to say that the very best teacher in Florida ought to get the same $2,500 as the very worst teacher in Florida. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't have a better calibration system. We currently have something called the value-added model, the VAM, in our education system. And it's sort of a formula that's a lot like the BCS standings and what all goes into them. And you can't judge people based on a metric that they don't understand and that you can't explain. And so I think that we will have some reform to try to make sure we have better systems in place to identify those teachers that go above and beyond. But every person watching tonight, and all of us here know, that we've had some teachers that have impacted our lives in remarkable ways. We wouldn't be the human beings we are now without them. But all of us also know that we've had teachers that have no business in a classroom. And I think it's insulting to the work of the great teachers we have to just give everybody the same $2,500. It's almost lazy for the legislature to not go in and, I think, make a compensation system that really attracts bright people into education. I mean, right now, Jeff, if you want to offer a life as a teacher or an educator to a bright young person coming out of school, they essentially have to take a life of poverty for the first few years. And that's wrong. I mean, our schools should be cathedrals of learning. Our teachers should be the best and brightest among us, and we have to create careers in education that allow that to happen.
Representative Ingram, your education?
Yeah, I mean,
person, so-
Representative Gates wrapped up with something that's important. I mean, I think every teacher ought to make more money, and but to address that specific question, and to go back a step further, you know, the governor's budget comes out, and it's you know, technically called, you know, his budget recommendations. There are some. I think his budget was good. I mean, I think that it was well put together compared to past budgets that I've seen, you know, even before I was elected. However, it made some assumptions that there was money. Places where maybe there really isn't money, that there are cuts that he sort of assumed that probably aren't really there. Again, it was better than we've seen in the past, but that's certainly true in many cases in that budget. And so the amount of money that will actually be available for some of the bonuses and raises, I don't know what it'll be. I don't think any of us can tell you right now. There'll be maybe a little bit too technical, but there will be another budget estimating conference before the House and Senate budgets are you know, before we begin to construct them, and that'll give us a more ideal or, you know, realistic picture of what we have to actually work with. And so I know that's not a great answer, but I mean, I think there are some technicalities that have to be worked out before we even know what we have to work with as far as the budget is concerned.
Okay. Question from a viewer. Go ahead, Senator Evers.
The one thing that that I think that folks at home need to fully understand is the fact that the governor makes a recommendation. The House passes their budget, the Senate passes their budget, then we go to conference and we come up with what the budget is in the state of Florida. At that point in time, all the governor can do is veto line items out of that budget. So when you say the governor's budget, no, the governor just made some recommendations of what he thought and what he would like to see. But there's 120 House members and there's 40 senators that will actually draft the budget, and we will agree on a budget, and then we will send it to the governor.
Very good. Question from a viewer. Blackwater drilling. Question is mainly geared towards Representative Broxson, but the viewer says, I would like to know how the others feel about the issue of drilling in the Blackwater State Park. Are they for it or against it, and why? Representative Broxson, obviously, we'll start with you on this.
Well, we're going to have a town hall meeting on the 25th of February on Jay, and I want everyone to come. And what I want them to know is the facts. The facts are simple. Historically, in northern Santa Rosa and Okaloosa, we've had massive drilling with very few problems. The fact is, we've had drilling for the last 35 years in Blackwater. Now, this has to be gauged against our responsibility as consumers on what our position on being dependent on oil from other countries. Jay, over the 35 years, has produced 14 billion gallons of crude, almost 700 million cubic feet of natural gas. That's a major find, and there may be another one. But let me say this, I am not going to do anything unless I have a clear understanding from my constituents. That's the direction they want to go. And hopefully we'll find that out on the 25th of February.
Would the rest of you like to add?
I'm sure, because I live right in the middle of Blackwater River Forest, and that's my home. And I would not allow for anything to go on in the middle of Blackwater Forest that I feel would jeopardize the forest. But as Representative Broxson said, there has been drilling. There has actually been finds in Blackwater. In fact, they're doing some seismic work up there now that extended from Alabama 5 miles into Florida. They actually hired some 35 folks that weren't employed to actually do the monitoring of the pitcher plant prairies, of wetlands, to see that these lines were offset to where they wouldn't be going through any wetlands. They're not going to drill in any wetlands. They're not going to drill in any area that's close to the most pristine river that we have here in the Panhandle, the Blackwater River. And so, but the jobs and the economic advantages that we would have, and that little bit that would help us get away from the dependence of foreign oil, you know, I don't see anything wrong with it. It would add economy to our schools, because a certain percent of the money would go to our schools, go to our counties, and it would be a big boom here in the Panhandle.
Very credible sources say that it's a real possibility that the U.S. could be energy independent within a decade. They're not calculating in Blackwater River, so one might say, why take the chance from a risk-reward standpoint?
Well, the entire energy economy has changed in the last just several years. America is the Saudi Arabia of shale oil. And the fact that,
and natural gas.
Yeah, and natural gas. And so as our energy economy continues to shift towards those sources of fossil fuels and those sources of energy, I think we become less dependent on what would have just a decade ago been considered the traditional ways to explore it and produce. So I don't think that the country's energy independence is necessarily contingent upon whether or not we drill in the Blackwater forest. But that said, I think that we have to be very cautious about what we do, particularly as the energy markets continue to alter and change. And I'm actually really excited that America is going to have more opportunities for exploration nationwide, that we're going to have the opportunity to realize the benefit of that shale oil as we convert, I think, more of our use to natural gas. Recent projections indicate that America could become the #1 producer of energy on the planet, within a certain period of time, and so I think that bodes well for the country.
Yeah, it does bode well for the nation as a whole. I want to get to some more viewer questions here, if I can. One asks, is there any proposal or policy of the Obama administration in which you agree?
I don't think he's signed for resignation, has he?
Well, no, I think in all fairness, there are elements of the Obama administration that articulate a very favorable position on school choice and on rising student achievement. It is actually people that have left the Obama administration that have started the parent trigger movement, which says that if you have a failing school, rather than letting the bureaucrats at the county office decide, rather than letting the politicians in Tallahassee decide, you actually have the parents in the school take a vote as to whether or not they want to convert to a charter school, or if they don't want to convert to a charter school, what management changes would need to happen so that the educational product delivered to the children would improve. That wasn't an idea that came from Republicans. It was an idea that came from President Obama. It's been endorsed by Governor Jeb Bush, who we all look up to, and I think that it's an area where we could have common ground and we could start looking at education not just as a government monopoly, not just as something where people in government make the decisions, but you actually can go in and empower parents. I mean, my dad served as a school superintendent, and one of the things he learned is that if you're ever going to turn a school around, the change has to come from the most important stakeholders there, and it's the parents who trust that school to educate their child.
Any of you would like to add to that? Or?
Well, I think he proves that he believes personally in marriage and commitment to his children. I am confused about his social issues, but that's something he'll have to face with his maker. I believe that he's a great communicator. He proved that during the re-election, but there are many, many issues that he has that disturbs not only Florida, but many people that have the core values that we've always considered to be important.
Okay. All right. Let me move on, and I'm going to kind of combine some of this because we've had some viewers emailing and calling in, but let's talk about ethics reform. What will be done along those lines in this legislative session?
I'd gladly defer to anyone who's on an ethics committee. I don't know if you are, but and I'll also be happy to talk about it. Some of the things talked about have to do with the committees of continuing existence, which are have sometimes been accused of becoming slush funds for politicians. The proposal is to eliminate those and then increase the ability to contribute from 500 to 10,000. I don't know if that's a good number or not, and that'll all be vetted during the committee process. But those are probably two of the things that have been focused on the most. Also, the ability for someone, once they leave office, to lobby a member of the legislature or another branch of government to tweak some of that. So that's where the focus is right now, I think, on the ethics reform. It's obviously a priority of Senate President Gates and Speaker Will Weatherford in the House. And so I think those are the major tenets of the bills that I think we'll see later on.
Anybody like additional comments?
I want folks to realize we are a citizens' legislature, and we all have other jobs. And when I go to vote on agricultural issues, I'm a farmer.
Right.
I know more about agricultural issues than Dr. Renewart in the House. But I'm no expert on medical issues. So shouldn't he serve on the medical committee? Shouldn't I serve on like agriculture? So you know, how far do you want ethical change to go? You know, because a lot of things has been said about, you know, we pass bills for our own self gain or whatever. You know, to me, the 1% rule is what judges it. I mean, you know, if there's over, if I pass a bill for a strawberry, you pick strawberry farm. Well, if there's over 100 you pick strawberry farms, I don't see how I gained anything personally for it. And I feel like that so many times folks forget the fact that we are experts from the jobs that we have outside the legislative process. And we should be allowed to use that expertise that we have gained in order to assist, and then try to use a little common sense when we're working on these issues.
All right. Voting is something that has been in the news here lately. The president talked about it in the State of the Union address this past week. Florida happened to be kind of, again, focused in the last election on having some issues with long voter lines, so on and so forth. One of the viewers wants to know, do you support or oppose increasing the number of early voting days, including the weekend prior to the election?
I support it, and I expect that the legislature is going to pass an elections reform package that has a lot more early voting days, that has voting on Sundays, and that gives people more of an access to the ballot. I mean, it's really a fundamental question about government that if we ever appear to be a government that is trying to suppress the vote or limit people's access to the ballot, that's something that erodes everything else we do, because then the people don't trust us. They think we're just looking out for ourselves. So I think we ought to have great early voting practices that allow for a lot of that voting to occur, and I think that's the direction the legislature is headed.
I have
But
about,
Jeff,
go ahead.
Along with that, the thing that I feel like, you've got certain counties, if we mandate that you must have 10 early voting days, like Franklin County, those folks in Franklin County could vote 100 times a piece in a 10-day period.
There's some of us who wish they would.
Well, I understand, but it's just a small county. So I think a lot of that needs to be left up to the individual supervisor of elections to determine what their abilities are. And we should not mandate that all counties have a 10-day voting cycle.
Okay. We have got probably around 6 minutes left in this program, and I want to try to get as many viewer questions on as I possibly can, so I'm going to hit you guys here with sort of some rocket fire here. Are you in support of the idea of casinos in Florida?
No.
No.
Well, we have casinos in Florida now. We're probably not going to bulldoze them. The question is how to have a policy that ensures the greatest return for Floridians without having a market that is unsavory.
And Jeff, I know we're
go
short on
ahead.
time here, but you know the state is the biggest gambling entity that there is in the state, and we know with the Florida Lottery. And then I don't know how much as folks travel around the state, there are things called internet cafes. We've sort of started to deal with those, have dealt with them to some extent, but they look like internet cafes, but you go inside and they're like little casinos, and they pop up in a public supermarket or next to a Target, and so anyway, I think that's one thing as far as gambling goes. We've got to continue to deal with, because they still continue to operate in the state, and then it's like a casino, but it's the worst parts of a casino. It's sort of feeding on the people that can least afford to be in there. I've never been in one.
Okay, I'm just checking.
The other question, why alter, this is from a viewer, why alter the Florida retirement system? It's financially healthy. That comes from Dan.
Well, every major company in the world has, and so it only demonstrates, I think, an almost Neanderthal government approach to not say that we have to alter our system as well. But know this, there is no proposal under consideration by the Florida legislature that would make any changes for any current state employees. And none of us would support that, because we believe that the state's made a deal with those folks who are currently in the system. But moving forward, we have to ensure that there's a sustainable model in the future, not just now.
Any of you want to add to?
Well, I want to add one thing, and it's not about the retirement system, but when we talk about deals and we talk about education and we talk about bright futures, when we have students that we told that you study hard, you earn a bright futures, and we're going to use that for your college education, and then we turn around and we make it subject to what the parents' financial regards are, and we ask all the financial questions from the parents. That's not right. What are we teaching our children when we ask them to work hard, to do a good job, and you're going to have bright futures, and then we turn around and try to tie it to the parents' financial backing?
Yeah.
Okay, I just had to add that.
No, fair enough, fair enough. We talked about campaign finance reform, I think. Well, we actually didn't. We talked more a little bit about voters and ethics. So real quick, campaign finance reform, anything major there? That?
Yeah. I probably touched on that a little bit in the wrong segment, but the campaign finance reform, the sort of current common wisdom proposal now is, like I said, do away with CCEs, eliminate those, increase the contribution limits, and then make sure that there are tight reporting requirements so that, you may be able to take or accept more money or give more money, but that everyone is disclosed who it went to and where it goes. And I think that's ideal, to be able to follow the dollars and see where they're going.
We have about 3 minutes left. I want to ask you how important it is, and I'm going to gear this toward you, Representative Gates, because your dad is the president of the Senate, and so often Northwest Florida is considered sort of the black sheep, so to speak, of the state. In many ways, we feel like we're left out. How important? I don't want all of you to comment on this, but how important is it to have Senator Gates from Northwest Florida, president of the Florida Senate? What does it mean?
Well, he keeps referring my bills to multiple committees, so maybe I need to hit him up more at the dinner table. But I would say this, the most tangible thing that we can see at this moment in time, only a few months into his presidency, is that without Senate President Gates in the position he's in, there would be a toll on the new Pensacola Bay Bridge, without question. So that alone, I think, is a huge dividend. But it's more than just a transportation project or being able to bring home the bacon. What I think is most important is that we're going to be able to project Northwest Florida's values to the entire state. I don't think we'd be talking about ethics reform if we didn't have a Northwest Floridian in charge to be able to say, these are things that matter to our folks. I think we know this. The sanctity of life will be protected, the sanctity of marriage, the things that so many of us care about. And that's why I'm glad he's there, because we'll be able to tell the Northwest Florida story in a unique way, and folks will be listening.
I have about 1 minute. Comments?
Senator Gates is one of the most articulate, brilliant people I've ever met. He's convinced his colleagues that he can lead this state, and very fortunately, he's from the Panhandle.
And not only is he Senate President, but he's a powerful one, a good man, and he'll do a lot of good. He gives us the ability to counterbalance the 40-member delegations with the 4 or 5 of us by virtue of him being there.
That's exactly right. And as a colleague, I could not have asked for a better senator to have served with.
This is just a wide open question here. Are you more optimistic going into this session than you have been in the past?
Absolutely. Looks like we're not going to have a deficit. That's the first time I've been there that we've not had a deficit, but we proved, like many of the citizens, that we can live within our means.
Gentlemen, it's been a real pleasure. Enjoyed the conversation. I wish we could continue on for another hour or so. There are a lot of fascinating things to talk about. And we greatly appreciate all of our viewers who called in or emailed us with questions. Thank you, and I'm sorry we could not get to all of them. We greatly appreciate you joining us this evening. And gentlemen, we wish you all the very best for the 2013 session. Our guests this evening, the Northwest Florida Legislative Delegation, Senator Greg Evers, Representatives Clay Ingram, Doug Broxson, and Matt Gates. Senate President Don Gates and Representative Clay Ford were unable to join us this evening due to scheduling conflicts. We thank you so very much for watching Legislative Review 2013 Dialogue with the Delegation. I'm Jeff Weeks. Have yourself a very safe and wonderful weekend. We'll see you soon. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.